Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. So happy you could attend. Come inside, come inside. Hey, I've got some bonus points for anybody that in the comments is going to be able to let me know where that quote comes from. It's something that I don't know. Every time I start this podcast, it always jumps to mind as how uh, we should introduce this. And so I'm happy that you are here, my friend. And I am happy to introduce Craig McManus. Now, Craig is the owner operator of McPlants Garden Center. It's out here in Georgia, west of Atlanta. And so this is another opportunity for me to talk to somebody else from down here in Georgia. Now, Craig is also the host of the Garden Question podcast. And this is a podcast where he focuses in on not only gardening, but landscaping and all aspects of those types of topics. So it's a great podcast to be listening to. He's got experts on from all over the country, all over the world that come in and answer questions, talk about tips and tricks on landscaping and how to have the best garden for your circumstances and really what you want to do. Now, we are going to be talking to Craig about his experience with becoming a grandfather, as well as talking about his grandfathers. I'm also going to learn about a little known variety of apple called the Yates. And that is an apple that was actually designed, manufactured, morphed, whatever you do to create a variety of apples. That happened here in Georgia, and we get into talking about that particular type of apple. Before we get started, though, with this conversation with Craig, I want to remind you that I have a course at Grandparents Academy called Intentional Grandfathering. This is a four-part video course where I go through the history of grandfathers. I go through about how different grandfathers build connections with their grandchildren. I talk about the importance of grandfathers in grandchildren's lives. We get into topics about depression, anxiety, substance abuse, all sorts of different topics that just bring to light what grandfathers in particular can really do to help their grandchildren navigate these types of subjects as they grow into young adults. Now, I also want to remind you, too, that I've got a coaching program that's all set up for new grandfathers where we sit down and we create a plan for you so that you can really start off your relationships with these new grandchildren on the right foot, that you can have the impact that you desire for them. And this coaching package is also something that can be used and we can talk about and mold it to seasoned grandfathers that might have hit a bump in the road when it comes to their relationships with their grandchildren as well as their adult children. So with over 200 hours of talking about grandparents, reading dozens of books on grandparenting, and involved in countless just discussions around grandfathering, around grandparents, and around what grandchildren need, I am confident that I can help you maximize your influence with your grandchildren and with your family. So if you are watching this on YouTube, what I want to let you know is that this is going to end up being an audio only podcast. And so what that means is after you watch this introduction with me, we're going to go to the logo and you're going to be able to hear Craig and I have a fantastic discussion. So without further ado, let's jump into this great conversation. Hi, Craig. Welcome to the Cool Grandpa podcast. I'm excited to have you on.
Yeah, I've been anticipating this ever since you invited me, and I'm looking forward to our conversation with grandpas and plants.
Yeah, this is a great time of year to get this thing going because I think this should be coming out probably in June, so right around summertime when it's good to get a lot of those vegetables in, and as well as even start planning for pumpkin season coming up.
Oh, yeah. I haven't been able to grow a good pumpkin, so maybe we can figure that out together.
Yeah. I want to get started with having you give us a brief introduction of yourself and kind of your background.
Sure. Well, my wife and I live about 40 miles outside of it, west side of Atlanta, and we live on 4 acres. We have 3 adult children. 2 are married. One's just graduated from college. So we have grown up, or my family's grown up on this 4 acres here. I have 2 grandsons. One is already here. He's about 3 years old. His name's Graham. And I have another grandson on the way, and he'll be here in July, and his name is Bo. And my wife is Sally, who's actually a cool grandma, and she is her and I own a boutique landscape gardening business where we design and build gardening spaces or places where people have significant events in their lives, in their gardens or in their landscapes. And I've been in the green industry for 40 years, in the garden center business, of course, the design build business. I hold a lot of certifications, which I won't bore you with, and I have a degree in business. I produce a podcast, the Garden Question Podcast, which is a weekly podcast that comes out every Thursday. And it's been a blast doing that because even after 40 years in this industry, I'm learning something new every day. And every time I learn or interview the guests there, it's like learning on steroids again. There's so many areas in the gardening field that you can specialize in or generalize in, but it's a fascinating place to be, is in the garden and learning about gardening.
Oh, absolutely. And I think too, not only is it, trying to figure out what the plants and trees and those things are, but you even get into regional differences too that can blow you out, because you could talk to somebody, let's say Southeast. Well, Southeast is huge. What might grow really well in the mountains of Tennessee might not grow so well in the panhandle of Florida, but they're still Southeast, right?
Yeah, it's still Southeast. There's so many variables, and intuitively, I kind of worked through those in my mind, but I tried to list them out one time, and I got up to about 40, 50 different variables, and I could still think of some more, I believe. But there's just all these little, I mean, even microclimates. You may be growing in zone 8, but you may have a microclimate behind your house or front of your house, wherever, and that may be 7. And that's not uncommon, but that's the fun thing about gardening. You're always learning and always determining. You just got to go out there and make mistakes. You got to kill some plants and learn learn it, because you don't want to be afraid of it. If you're gardening, you're going to kill some plants, but you're going to enjoy a lot of plants too that grow and flourish and feed your soul and feed your just makes it a better day to be in the garden or participating in the garden. So it's a great place to be.
Well, I know I have a love-hate relationship with mine. I like going out there and doing some work and things on it, but I'm always curious sometimes because I see weird plants and weird things starting to sprout up that were not there last year. And I know somehow some bird dropped a seed or something happened where I get some interesting little plants going that I kind of let them go just so I can see what happens with them.
Yeah, that's always exciting. That's not uncommon either, because then the birds can drop them, the wind can blow them in, or that seed could be laying there dormant for, like a crabgrass seed. It'll lay there 20 years waiting for the right conditions to germinate. And then it meets that and you got crabgrass in your lawn, unless you've done a pre-emergent. And sometimes that doesn't even work. But yeah, there's always things. I had that yesterday. We were on a project and there were these plants popping up and I didn't know what they were exactly. So we researched them and found out that it was Joe Pye weed, which is a great pollinator plant. But it was thriving in this garden, and it was considered a weed because it's a plant that we didn't want it there. So it's a weed when you're, that's the definition of weeds, a plant you don't want in that location.
Sure, sure. Hey, I do want to jump back a little bit and have you tell us your reaction when you learned you were going to become a grandfather for the first time, and when you got the news that when Graham was going to be showing up, and what was going on with your life, and how did that news affect you?
Yeah, that was an amazing time. Still is an amazing time, and we were very excited because we knew the next generation was coming on, and we looked with anticipation of how much fun that was going to be, how much excitement, and how much responsibility it was going to be. You know, it's there as grandpas, we do have a responsibility for our grandkids. I feel like to a point, and just watching them grow and enjoying watching them, watching him meet the challenges in life and how we overcome those and how he'll overcome them.
Yeah, it's I think it's one of those things where you're blessed when you're a grandfather that you can sit back a little bit, being somewhat detached as the grandson or granddaughter starting to grow, and you have a different perspective on it versus when you're mom and dad. And you certainly love first steps and everything else, but I think as grandparents, you take that information in and you enjoy it a little bit different than you did when you were a parent.
Yeah, you do. It's we always get the FaceTime calls when he's done that first step, and now that he can talk, he can tell us about it. Before mom was telling us about it and what all he did. So those are we enjoy those too, and it's we're looking to a lot more of those.
Oh, sure. What are some of the things that you're doing to start to build that relationship with Graham?
Well, it began really when he was young, and I got to hold him first time. It was a few days after he was born when I got to hold him. But we, he's there and he's just a little fella, and I'm thinking, well, I want to get his attention because they say babies really can't, or at least I understand that they can't really see that well when they're young or they're, but I, I did a little thing where I popped my lips. I just went like that to him, just trying to get a reaction of some sort. And I'm looking at him, I'm popping and I see his upper lip move. Well, that could have just been a natural reflex, but to me that meant he had heard me and he was trying to mimic me. Now I may be just a crazy old grandpa thinking that, but that's where it started. And for the next few years until he could communicate verbally, if he wanted me, he would pop his lips, or at least go through the motion of popping his lips toward me. Or if he was talking to grandma and I wasn't on the FaceTime, he would pop his lips, and that meant get grandpa. So, and then when we were in person, it was he would always greet me popping his lips like that, and I would of course do it back to him. And so that's a little communication we had going on really before he could verbally communicate. Now that he's verbally communicating, we haven't done that really that much, but I might recall it and bring it out some.
Oh, sure. Well, and it's interesting that I think all through a young grandchild's life, there's little things that become kind of this is a me and grandpa kind of a thing, whether it's, corny jokes at a certain stage, or like you said, it's popping, or it might be doing some different activities. There's always these little things that we get so much enjoyment out of that are kind of like, this is our little thing. This isn't grandma and Graham and granddad's thing. This is just me and Graham's thing.
Yeah. Connecting is the connection point. Just that personal connection that you've got with your grandchild.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to pivot over a little bit and talk about your grandfathers. Have you introduced them to us? Tell us about your backgrounds and the relationship with them, because I think their relationship with you really kind of influenced your interest in gardening and landscaping.
Well, I knew my grandparents, my mom's dad, my dad's dad, for the last few years of their life. My mom and dad were the youngest children in a large family, and we'll start off with my dad's dad, who Grandpa Mac, and I called him Pete because he called me Pete. It seemed I asked my dad that once. I said, "Why did he call me Pete, or why do I call him Pete?" And he said, "Well, that's just something he did with everybody. He called Pete, and you just reversed it on him and started calling him Pete." So he was known to me as Pete, and everybody else, I don't know what they called him, but that's what I called him. But I was fortunate enough to know him. My brother and sister weren't really didn't have that opportunity. My brother wasn't born. My sister was very young, so I doubt she remembers a whole lot. But Pete was a farmer, and Pete plowed mules on the farm and milked cows every morning and probably every afternoon. But they took that milk and they churned it and made butter out of it. And then he would take that butter along with other produce that they produced on the farm in the garden. He probably got some from neighbors also, and he would take that to a city about 30 miles away. And he had clients there, customers there, that he would take that produce, the butter, whatever else they would produce on the farm or he could think of to sell to them. And he would make a regular trip over and do that. Probably helped too that he had three daughters located in the same city, but that was a regular thing for him is to be a peddler, as they called it, of farm produce and to produce that too. He was 75 years old when he died, and that he died the same month that President Kennedy was assassinated, which is always kind of in my formed an impression on me because my grandfather died and President Kennedy got shot. So we won't go down that road. But anyway, that's when that happened. But um, we had a lot of family gatherings on the farm. Uh, Christmas was a big time. Mother's Day was a big time. Uh, and then some various Sundays, they would just be on the porch and talking, and we'd be out in the yard playing and things like that. But he had a 1958 Chevrolet pickup truck when I was around, and I remember riding around with him we went to a cattle auction one time and that. But the biggest memory I have of him and with that truck is he had uh, a cider mill, and we would go out and pick up apples around the apples trees. I believe the variety was a Yates apple, which is not a apple that most people would know. It's an old timey variety. But we would fill the whole back of that pickup truck up with those apples, just overflowing, and bring them back to the cider mill, which was just a little portable thing. It was electrical powered. And we'd throw those apples in the hopper. They would be ground up, dropped down into a basket that once that basket was filled, would slide it over and put it under a press, and it would screw down, and we'd take a long bat sort of thing and put on there and put a lot of pressure on it and squeeze that apple juice down and that pulp down to just really flat. All that juice would come out and flow down through the trough that that was built there and through a strainer and into a bucket. And that was some of the best apple juice. It has to be the best apple juice I ever had because it was fresh. I participated in growing it uh, or in harvesting it. And then I think I took about a gallon of it home, but we had to drink it pretty fast or it would go bad because it had no preservatives in it, fresh and everything. So um, that's what I remember a lot about him. Uh, my mom's dad, we called him Pop. And Pop was 76 years old when he died. I was 6 years old when he died. And he was a twin, which I didn't know for numerous years later that he was a twin. And he owned a grocery store, which actually he carried some of the butter. I remember looking in the dairy case one time and seeing my other grandparents' butter in that dairy case, from McManus Farms or whatever it was called. I can't remember that part, but my granddad had the grocery store, and my dad actually worked in that grocery store, and I don't know how much that contributed to the relationship my dad and mom had. He may even got the job because the relationship my mom and dad had. But anyway, he also had a dry goods store connected to that. He farmed. He had timber that he harvested. He was actually in the gold mining business at one time, up until World War II, where all of his gold mining equipment got confiscated or donated or whatever happened at that to supply the metal for the war effort. But he was also the county probate judge. So he was pretty active. and he was the first person that ever paid me any money to do something, which I don't know. I don't know, probably 3 years old, maybe 4 years or something. I don't know how old I was, but he had in the grocery store at that time, there were soft drink bottles and there were all these different varieties, and you had to sort them out and put them back in the case that they came in and send them back to the bottler. And of course, they would wash them, clean them, and refill them and send them back out and cap them and refill them. Uh, Send them out again. Well, I sorted those. There's probably 4 or 5 cases there. And when I was finished, he told me, man, what a great job. And he gave me a nickel for doing it. And I thought, wow, this is great. I got paid for doing this, and it's a nickel. And so what did I do with it? I go straight for the candy aisle or candy case and buy candy. Now I got to thinking about this, and I thought, well, he could have just given me that candy, but what he was doing is he was teaching me how to earn money, and maybe that was the spark that gave me the entrepreneurial spark that I have today. But it's like earning something, for yourself rather than just being given something. So if that wasn't his intentions, that's the way I'm now here 69 years or 68 years later look at it, is that's probably what he was doing.
A couple of things jumped out at me when you were talking about Pop, and one of them is, I got to ask you the question, being here in Georgia, was he doing his gold mining up here in North Georgia?
Actually, it was in Alabama.
Oh, okay.
There's that same Appalachian Mountains there in North Georgia, goes on over into Alabama. And from what my uncle said, it was over in Talladega is where his mine was over there. And he actually did some in Randolph County too.
Gotcha.
So my uncle just told me a story because we were throwing these things around the yard one time. There's this big pile of cannonball. It looked like cannonballs, about the size of a softball. And he said those, and we were just, as grandkids, were just playing with them in the yard. My granddad had gone. And he told us those were put in the rock crusher. They used to be about twice the size as a basketball. And they put them in a rock crusher and it crushed the rocks as it would tumble. And they would beat down to that size of a softball. But I fortunately have one of those things now. I still have it. I got to find it. I don't know where it is.
That's interesting. And for folks that are like listening to this, so North Georgia was the scene of one of the first gold rushes in the United States when they found gold up here north of Atlanta. And so, yeah, evidently there's pockets of gold all the way through, and there's still gold up here. It's just now I think it costs too much to get it out to make it worthwhile. But folks still pick up a nugget here or there when they're up on some of these local rivers.
Yeah, that's a big story within itself. I actually lived from the very first gold mine, gold strike in Billerica, Georgia, and then they abandoned Billerica to go to Dahlonega when that was discovered up there. But you're exactly right. It's so hard because of the quartz that surrounds that gold, and this a hard process to get it out. But anyway, we're off topic now, aren't we?
Yeah, well, a little bit. But the other thing that jumped out at me when you're talking about separating out the bottles and then getting paid for that. So my grandfather was out in eastern Oregon, and Oregon, with some of the other states, has a deposit on all the bottles. So when you buy, let's say, a Coca-Cola for $1, it's going to be $1.05 because Oregon puts a 5-cent deposit on those things. And the summer times, we would be doing some of the same things. We'd be scrounging around looking for cans, looking for bottles, doing all that collection. And then when we had what we thought was enough, grandfather would take us into town to the little supermarket, and we'd turn those in, get our couple of dollars maybe, and then turn around and buy some popsicles for on the hot summer days. So definitely have fun memories collecting and sorting out some pop bottles, as they call them.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure that we did that here in Georgia. We may have. I just don't remember, or over in Alabama where this event actually happened. So, but anyway, that's a lot of fun. Another thing about my granddad, Pop, is that he took some timber and gave it to my mom and dad. My uncle hauled it for them for free, and he cut it up and milled it to build their first house with it. It was a brick ranch house, but he gave them the wood to do that and to do the framing on the house. So that was pretty cool.
Oh, that's awesome. Those are such fun memories when you come into those homes that have been built by hand and with timber or materials from kind of the site, or it has some kind of connection with the family.
Mm-hmm. It probably came from my granddad's old home place too. So that would have been a great grandfather mine that may have planted that. That thought just occurred to me. So there's a lot of heritage in that house.
I want to ask you now about how do you think that this connection, even though your grandfathers died fairly when you were fairly young, but how did that affect you, do you think, and build a connection between grandparents and grandchildren and gardens and that being kind of outside and doing some of those activities?
Hmm. Um, well, they were both farmers and they both raised things, but of course that was kind of normal during those times. Um, I mean, I was a real young fellow when they both died, but the having your hands in the soil was just common way of life during those times for them. That's how they grew up. Nowadays we can just go to the grocery store and have to eat, but or find what we need to eat at the grocery store. But at that time, it was supplementing food, and they still had grocery stores, but most everybody had a garden during that time. Now, how did that affect me now? And doing what I'm doing, I I hate to say it, but probably not that much, because the last thing I wanted to do was what I'm doing right now. Didn't want to be in I didn't want to be in the landscape business and the gardening business, because my dad, who's an educator, he to supplement his income and my mom's income, they had a landscape company, and a small little landscape company, and I got to be the labor force, and that turned me totally off on it. I didn't want to do that. I would not say there's a connection, or even a roundabout connection, from there to what I do today. I
Okay.
mean, I can look back and say, "Hey, this was great and this was fun, and I experienced this during that time." But did it inspire me to do what I do today? No, no, doesn't.
That's fair. The other question I've got for you, though, is now that you've been doing some of this and we've got Graham and we've got Bo, do you think that there's a way that grandparents can use some of the landscaping projects around the house or gardens to kind of build up a connection with grandchildren and show them how things come out from a seed to finished product, whether it's tomatoes or something else?
Oh yeah, there's a number of things you could do. For just simply planting a tree, whether that tree is you plant it with your grandson or granddaughter or both, and you're planting that tree, then that becomes a stake in the ground, so to speak, a touch point in time where, you know, we grandpa and I planted that tree, and that there's a good chance it'll be there multiple generations. And so, the rest of their lives, they can always look back and say that was something grandpa and I did. But it also, if a tree's planted, say, in honor of a new grandchild, that's always, I think, a good thing to do for a grandchild, because they can, again, it's another touch point and say, yeah, that was planted on the same day I was born or close to it. And so it just forms another connection there. Um, planning something for someone else, by taking that, finding you and grandpa, maybe go plant a rose for grandma, or you go plant a little, or mom's favorite plant, then you're helping the grandchild honor their mom, and hopefully pleasing their mom by doing that for them, by knowing what plant that is and doing that.
Are there some quick and easy growing plants that would lend themselves to these kinds of projects? You talked about a rose, and I don't want to get too exotic because especially when you have little kids, they're going to want to start to see something happening pretty quick in a garden.
Well, one thing that I did with Graham is I imagine, they were here on my birthday. That was my birthday present. I asked for all of them to be here. And so I'd imagine this interaction with Graham, I'd kind of planned it out where we would plant these little plants together in a pot. I had the soil already. I had the pots. I had the plant. We used plugs. Of course, you could do this with seed, but the quicker return is we bought a plant already growing in a pack. So I imagine that him and I would be there at the wheelbarrow with the soil, and we'd all be putting that in together. Well, he didn't have any interest in it at all. Very little anyway. So I went ahead and planted it up. It wasn't anything going anyway like I imagined in my mind. And so we got him. I got them finished, and so we pick them out. Now he comes back over, and I asked him to water them. So he did participate in the watering some. And then I talked to him. I said, "Look, Graham, I'm going to set these over here. I want you to take those home with you and take care of them." And he said he would. And so he took them home, and his mom was telling me that every time he went by those plants, he would tell her, "Those are Grandpa's plants. Those are Grandpa's plants." There's about 6 of them, I believe. And so a week ago, I saw him at my daughter's graduation, and the first thing he said to me was, "Grandpa, the plants are living, they're growing." And so that was that was great. So it actually, you think they're not paying attention and they don't really care, and you're not making the impact that you had imagined in your mind that you were going to do for a while. But it did impact him, and it did get him. He does have an interest in it. My daughter tells me when they go to a garden center like at Lowe's, Home Depot, or the local garden center, whatever, it's always, "These plants are like Grandpa's plants here." So I know he's being impacted by what we're doing with that.
Are there any ones that lend themselves more for like little kids with that exploration and wanting to check things out? And where I'm going with this is my own grandson, Charlie, he got into Venus flytraps when they were in Virginia before they moved down. He saw one at the garden center, and they got one of those. And then they do really well in kind of that Wilmington, North Carolina, that coastal region of North Carolina. But are there some other little fun plants or interesting things that might spark some curiosity in kids?
Yeah, you can't go wrong with the carnivorous plants like that. We couldn't keep them in stock in the garden center when I had a garden center, so they would always go. But I mean, a cactus, that it's always, "Oh, I don't want to touch it. Do I want to touch it? I do want to touch it. No, I don't want to touch it." Those are easy to grow as long as you don't overwater them. You're keeping them in bright light or more. Those are always fun and simple to do. Succulents are fun and simple. You know, some people may say they're boring because they don't bloom, but they do bloom. But it's not like you would normally think. But when they do bloom, it's pretty exciting. So then there's things like marigolds or zinnias. That's what Graham and I planted up, were marigolds and zinnias. They're fast growing. They give you a quick return, relatively quick return, and then and they're simple. They're simple to do. But then as far as edible crops, you might do something. I mean, you can't go wrong with carrots or radishes. You can seed out carrots, and it's always best if you can, if they can help you seed them out, and they can come back and then help harvest them, which a carrot will just sit in the ground until you're ready to harvest it all winter. It's just like being in a refrigerator. You don't have to harvest them all the time so they don't spoil. But you pull that first carrot out, or they pull that first carrot out, you show them, and they pull it out, and you wash it off and eat it just right after you pulled it. Man, their face will light up, and it'll be a really exciting time to do that. The radishes are very quick. I think it's like a 14-day crop. that you can plant those and eat. The schools use those a lot in their gardens that they'll have at the school, because gardening usually takes place when most of us think about gardening when they're not in school. So radishes is a crop that they use a lot of times for that. So that's real quick.
I think too, we had talked a little bit about even the ability to plant a pizza in the garden, that you have everything that you could grow in that garden other than the crust.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's. I mean, you could actually grow the wheat with the crust. Technically, you could do that. You're probably not going to be able to grow enough wheat to get the for the crust, but you got, the basil and tomatoes and things like that you could grow other herbs and stuff that would, that you could imagine being on a pizza, and that would be an excellent little project. You can look that up on the internet and get that. But one of the more interesting stories I heard about was growing French fries. And you think, well, growing French fries, how do you do that? Well, instead of growing potatoes, we're growing you grow French fries. A lady that I'd interviewed on a podcast, she had told me about this story of her neighbor boy that had some challenges, and she wanted to know, he wanted to grow French fries. So they grew potatoes and they became French fries. And he did that for a number of years with her. And when on up to his horticulture insights and interests, he's going for a degree in horticulture now. But it helped him overcome some of the challenges that he was experiencing in life. But just anything you can eat from the ground, like the carrots and the radishes, but fruits and berries, planting fruit trees or something like strawberries or blueberries. If you don't have the room to grow them yourself, or even if you do, you can go to a blueberry farm and pick your own there. That's a great experience, or a peach orchard. And then those can become pies or just eating them raw or whatever. It's just, those are great experiences, even if you don't have your own to pick it on your own place. Just making those trips it's a lot of fun to do that. I know my children enjoy doing that with my grandpa or my dad, their grandpa.
Well, and I think too is one thing that's going to be so interesting for kids is if you have the equipment, is actually being able to take some of those, if you go to blackberry or raspberry, strawberries, whatever it is, coming back and actually making a small batch of jams and jellies or something with them and going through that process.
Oh yeah, that'd be a lot of fun. We've got an abundance of blueberries on our bushes this year, and my wife and I have been trying to figure out what are we going to do with those, because I don't think we can eat them all. I know we'll give a lot of them away. I mean, I'll eat them after they're frozen, but to me, their most fun time is eating them fresh off the bush. In fact, we probably eat half the ones we pick, especially at the beginning of the season. But we really had never done any canning, and so we're going to attempt that this year and can some of those blueberries, as long as the birds don't beat us to the blueberries.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because down here it's more concerned about the birds and squirrels and things. When I was living out in Portland, Oregon, you could go up into the mountains, and whether you get off the farms and you're in some of those federal lands and things like that, but you'd have these wild bushes and things. People would go out and go picking that, but you also had to kind of keep an eye out for bigger wildlife that might also be out in the spring and wanting to fatten up after hibernation.
Yeah, you just need to make sure you can run faster than everybody else,
Yeah.
right? And that's the joke.
Yeah. You got to at least be faster than one other person in that group. But
Yeah.
but yeah, that was always a thing too, and that was kind of interesting when we would take kids out. Is you'd have adults just kind of looking around, making sure you didn't have any competitors out there beyond the humans picking berries.
Yeah, well, you brought up wildlife, and that's one of the other benefits in gardening. And when I say gardening, I'm talking about landscaping too. Most of the world refers to landscaping and gardening as gardening, and to me, gardens are inside the landscape. But the amount of wildlife that you can attract to your garden is amazing. I mean, just around here, we have all kind of birds and all kind of other critters, chipmunks and squirrels and fox and coyotes and I hadn't had any bears yet. I've heard people talk about those in the area, but deer is another thing, armadillos. But they always, that's, if you can maybe set up, how do you interact with your grandchildren like with that? And, if you can get a picture or just have a conversation, even if it's a long distance conversation, you can have those and you can, talk about the snake that you saw in your garden. Some people I know are definitely afraid of snakes, but snakes actually do a lot of good things. And you can talk about the monarch butterfly or the other butterflies that you saw and the, and, grow them a butterfly garden or whatever. But there's a lot of wildlife that can become that conversation. That conversation can become very interactive with your grandchildren, and they'll relate to that.
To your point, it sparks up everything from biology to all sorts of different sciences. Even talking about, hey, you can actually grow some of your own food, and there's all sorts of discussions around. I think having a garden or having a landscape that you can involve grandkids with.
Oh yeah, yeah. There's just numerous ways, and there's so many benefits not only to you as a grandpa or grandma or whatever. Is there's a lot of physical benefits. There's a lot of mental benefits. It's a lot of stress relief. And I tell folks, if you garden, you don't have to you can save money at the health spa. You don't have to go to the health spa. You can just garden because you're burning a lot of calories there and you're in the fresh air. And there's a lot of great activities and a lot of great returns on your investment in gardening.
Absolutely. And Craig, I've had you on for a little bit. Anything about gardening and using gardening and landscaping to create an intergenerational connection that you'd like to bring up that maybe I haven't asked you?
One thing that I have always done for my grandchildren, my two grandchildren, but for my children also, is I pray a hedge of protection over them. I think that's so important out there that because there's so many schemes out there to lead them down the wrong path and the wrong direction. Pray for wisdom over them. And as a grandparent, it doesn't matter the distance that you are from them. You can, but I just think that's so important to ask for that covering over them and that they make wise decisions. I know that's something I do with my children. Um, every time they would leave after they got the car keys or whatever, it would be, remember, make wise decisions, because we tend to have our children, I guess in the beginning, more like a tunnel. We're having a tunnel. We can control everything that goes on or close to everything. And it works into a guardrails. And by the time they get the car keys and they graduate from college, there's no guardrail. They're making their own decisions, and there's not a whole lot we can do about it. So we think we're raising children, but we're actually, in my perspective, we're raising adults to make wise decisions, or at least start understanding what a wise decision looks like. They'll slip up and they'll goof up, but I think covering in prayer is the most important and biggest thing that we can do for them, and is a great touch point for them.
Well said. Craig, how can people find out more about you? How can they find your podcast and maybe connect with you if they are so inclined?
Sure. The podcast is thegardenquestion.com, and you can go on thegardenquestion.com and go to the contact form there and reach me there, or you can go to McPlants, McPlants, and .com, and that's the design build landscape company that we have. They're actually on the both same website, and you can get to either side through. You get to one, you can get to the other easily. But you can fill out the contact form there. The podcast comes out weekly on Thursday mornings. I interview different people throughout the country and some outside the country, and on all different aspects of gardening. There's a lot of children's interviews where I've interviewed people that specialize in children's gardening. So you could come there and get some ideas. I'd like for you to subscribe, and if you find it valuable, if you would pass it on through whatever means to your friends or relatives, neighbors, whoever, through social media or and get them to subscribe. I think you'll find a lot of benefits in it. And I've enjoyed this a lot, Greg. I look forward to talking with you soon again.
Yeah, this has been a blast, and we'll be sure to put links to all of that into the show notes too. So if folks are out working in the garden or walking the dog or whatnot, they'll be able to quickly and easily find those links back over to you. And Craig, thank you again for being on the Cool Grandpa podcast. I really have enjoyed this time together.
Oh, you're welcome. I've enjoyed it too, Greg.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Craig as much as I did. It was a blast learning more about his grandfathers, learning more about his family history, and learning more about how we can use gardening as well as just landscaping ideas to help build memories with our grandchildren. Whether it's planting a bush for grandma or for mom, or just being able to start a little garden where you can then at the end of the summer or during the summer go out and pick all the types of toppings that you want for pizza with your grandchildren. This was a great example of being able to get out away from devices and being able to spend time in nature and learning more about how food comes from the ground and from farming and from your own little gardens out back, and how that can help sustain you, as well as just the fun and interesting conversations we had around different plants that make kids, get excited about learning more about science, whether it's weather or soil or whatever that is. So I hope you had a blast listening to this conversation. Please do me a favor, share, like, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you're either watching it or wherever you're hearing it. It's a great way to help us grow the audience for this podcast and really be able to wave the flag and talk about the importance of grandfathers in the lives of our grandchildren, as well as in our families and communities. So I hope you had a blast with this one. And until we talk again, remember to stay cool.